Hello, everyone, and welcome again to an episode of Unfound Now. I am Unfound's host, Ed Densel. And before I take for granted that everyone knows what Unfound is, you may be finding out about the program for the first time if you're doing a search for recent disappearances and came across this video. Unfound is a missing persons podcast that started in September of 2016. It comes out every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Over the last 4.5 years, we have covered over 200 disappearances, and I think we have close to about 240 episodes now that you can find at the Unfound website, theunfoundpodcast.com. You can also find Unfound on iTunes. You can find it on Spotify, Stitcher, Podomatic, a variety of podcast platforms, the most popular ones. And you can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc., all the social media platforms as well. I started Unfound Now in the summer of 2020 because I wanted the ability to cover recent disappearances. For the regular episodes that come out every Friday, I have the rule that a disappearance must be a year old before we will consider it for an episode for the Friday, once again, for the Friday episodes. So with Unfound Now, this is a way that I can talk about recent disappearances, so within the last few months, and bring publicity to them, give them coverage, but also use them as a teaching tool as to how we can all learn more about disappearances. So if you go back and go to the first Unfound Now that I did in the summer of 2020, that was the disappearance of Linda Stoltzfus in Pennsylvania. We now know that she was abducted. Her remains have not been found, but a man has been charged with her murder. If you go back there and watch them up to the present, you know that I like to talk about themes and points that we can learn from these disappearances that then we can take and apply to other disappearances. Education is very important to me in regards to missing persons cases, because my impression is that the general public has a lot of misconceptions about missing persons cases and the missing persons community as a whole. And Unfound Now is devoted to educating the public, because I think that's the way more of these disappearances are going to get solved. So today I will be talking about the disappearance, and if you see me looking over to my left, that is where you're right. That is where my notes are on my other laptop. I will be discussing the disappearance of Kirsten Brueggemann, who disappeared from Indianapolis, Indiana on January 2nd, very early in the morning of January 2nd of 2021. So this is a disappearance that is about 2.5 years old. And how many Unfound Nows have I done now? About 6 or 7. We're going at a rate of about 1 a month. And we started off the year with Jason Landry in January, then in February, Aaliyah Scheibel. And then here for March 18th is when I recorded this, is going to be Kirsten Brueggemann. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the general facts, pose some questions, then you will see me, I will vanish from the screen, and you'll see a map of the area where Kirsten was that night, and then I will come back and you will see me again where I will talk about 3 important points in depth regarding her disappearance and the way we at Unfound look at these kinds of disappearances under these particular circumstances. So let me scroll down here for a moment, a little further down the page here. Now, you should know, as you would guess, there are a lot of choices that I can make regarding recent disappearances. Disappearances are in the news all the time, very recent ones. And a lot of them are solved fairly quickly, within a few days. Sometimes the people are found alive. Unfortunately, sometimes the people are found deceased. Most of the time, that is what happened. However, sometimes they go for a lot longer, and those are the kinds of disappearances that end up on the regular Unfound program that comes out every Friday. So I have a lot of choices, But for Kirsten's, why I picked that one out, why I picked her out, and she is still missing as of March 18th, 2021, 2.5 months later. Here are some of the reasons that I picked it, and once again, these will be themes for later in this video. Number one, I want to talk a little bit about poor reporting of disappearances. Number two, I want to talk about how friends are often not as helpful as the public would expect, and why is that? And number three, missing people often make decisions that are hard to understand. These are the three main points that pop up when I look at Kirsten's disappearance, and so those are the ones I will be talking about later in the video. So these are the facts as they sit 2.5 months later. I want you to know that I've gone to many articles, as many as I could find. In fact, that's going to be one of the points I'm going to talk about later. There aren't that many. I've gone to Facebook page. There is a Facebook page for Kirsten's disappearance. I've gone to Web Sleuths. There is a thread going on there. It's only 1 page long, unfortunately, with people writing some things. Sometimes, I don't go to Web Sleuths a lot, but sometimes if you go there, you do get like people's local opinions, people who live in the area, maybe can talk about the Indianapolis area, these particular blocks where she was with friends that night. Nothing like that on Web Sleuths. So I think, as far as public information goes, I think that I've done a lot of good coverage for this. Once again, I expect that hopefully, I'm hoping that Kirsten is found alive today. But if that doesn't happen, I'm guessing that as the days go on, if it turns into weeks, into months, there probably will be more information that comes out. But I'm going to analyze her disappearance as it sits on March 18th, 2021, once again about 2.5 months after her disappearance. So she was out with friends at a place called the Irish Mutt. It's a pub in Indianapolis. The address for it is 7041 East 10th Street in Indianapolis. A couple accounts differ. I found at least one where it says that she decided she wanted to go bowling. You have to remember, this was after midnight. So when we say January 2nd, we're talking very, very early in the morning or night of January 2nd, 12:20 a.m. So the friends say, but once again, the accounts differ, that she wanted to go bowling. And there is a bowling alley very close to it. I think it's called All-Star Bowling, that's somewhat southeast of where she was at this pub, but not far, and you will see this on the map when I do that here in a little bit. And none of her friends left the pub with her. She left alone. And then later, a video captures her walking south and then east into the parking lot of a YMCA. And what is interesting about this, and once again you'll see it on the map, is that the YMCA is even further away from the pub than the bowling alley is. Now, it turns out that the bowling alley was closed that night. Is that due to COVID? Is that their normal operating hours? I don't know, but it was closed. But video shows her walking into the parking lot of this YMCA, walking east in the parking lot on a video. She is by herself, and then that is the last time she was seen, and nobody has seen her. Not only was it the last time she was seen that night, but seemingly nobody has seen her again. Some additional facts. Once again, the bowling alley that night, if we were to believe that her intention was to go to the bowling alley and it was closed, and so she just decided to keep walking, it was closed that night. In addition, I have looked up the different addresses connected to Kirsten, where she has lived over that time, and none of the addresses that I could find are anywhere near the pub or the bowling alley or the YMCA. If she was planning to walk home, it was quite a distance. And I've read nothing that says that she lived in the area. So if we're to believe that she was walking home, it was going to be a long, cold walk in January in Indianapolis. And we also should know that it very well may be the reason she was walking is because Kirsten had been convicted of a DUI, but way back in 2017. And I don't know if that has anything to do with this disappearance or not. People make mistakes. We don't like DUIs. I believe that those people should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But we do know that many people get a DUI and then never drink and drive again. It's a mistake. They did it when they're young. In fact, I can tell you a friend of mine in college 30 years ago was charged with a DUI, could not drive for a while. Otherwise, a very, very good guy, just made a very stupid decision back then. So it very well may be that that's what happened with Kirsten as well. Some questions, though. What is still unclear to me is, how did Kirsten get to the pub that night? Did she take an Uber, Lyft? Did one of her friends drive her? Did she just happen to be in the area and then met her friends there? There's no news out there as to how she got to this pub, which I think is important given that she left the pub. Usually when we go somewhere, we usually leave whatever mode of transportation. We usually leave that place in the same mode of transportation. Secondly, why did her friends let Kirsten go by herself, here in the early morning city, a city setting? We don't know that either. No indications out there as to why that happened. Another question, did Kirsten know the bowling alley was closed before she ever left the pub? We don't know. And also, what do Kirsten's phone records and pings say about the time after being seen on the video by the YMCA? There is no news regarding that as all. I'm going to take for granted that she had a cell phone with her, as we all do these days when going out. But currently, 2.5 months into this disappearance, there is no news regarding any of that. But it's still a big question. As you would expect, cell phones, when we cover newer disappearances on Unfound, cell phone information is almost always talked about. Now, you get, of course, back into the early 2000s, into the 90s, then it doesn't come up quite as much. But you start around 2002, 2003, cell phone information is almost always included in any interview I do for the program. So now I'm going to convert to another view. You're going to see a satellite view through Google Maps of the area, in which I'm going to diagram some of what I just explained, and then I will come back to talk about some points and themes, what we can learn, and some insights into Kirsten's disappearance. Okay, here's the map analysis for the disappearance of Kirsten Brueggemann from Indianapolis, Indiana on January 2nd of 2021. You will see in the upper left-hand corner, I'm going to use my pencil here, this red dot shows where Manley's Irish Mutt, this pub, is on 10th Street in Indianapolis. This is where Kirsten was with her friends. And then at some point, just after midnight, going into January 2nd, she left, and this bowling alley that you've heard about, if you have seen the news, read the stories, this is where the bowling alley is right here. So it's about 600 feet southeast of the pub. And then the video, you will find a report that shows her walking once again alone. She was walking east. Here's where the YMCA is. In fact, you can see it, Harper J. Ransburg branch of the YMCA. This is where this is right here. And seemingly, to read the account, Kirsten is seen walking east through the parking lot. So this would be that direction, going that direction. And that is the last time that she was seen. Now, something interesting about this, I don't know if surprising or what, this big building right here, that's the city of Indianapolis's police headquarters. So here she is. Last time she is seen right here. Here is the Metropolitan Police Department's main headquarters right there. Very close. I didn't know that. Just something I came upon in preparing this video. I'm not here to go to conspiracy land or anything, but that just shows that disappearances can happen anywhere, even within the shadow of a police department. Now I'm going to zoom out here to show you the surrounding area. I do these kinds of videos for disappearances that we cover on the regular episodes of Unfound, because sometimes Unfound is an audio program, and sometimes you cannot explain locations and routes very well using audio. So I use the channel here for video and showing you, showing the listeners maps. And one of the points I always try to make in looking at these maps is we try to look at the surrounding area to see, is there a river, or is there a forest, a bunch of trees, lakes, anything like that, or a bus stop, anything where a person could have gotten on a mode of transportation and left, or could have gone into the woods, into a river, maybe on purpose, maybe by mistake. We just don't know. Now, what pops out to me in Kirsten's, maybe I should go back to that for a moment. So, for example, in the disappearance of Cameron Remmer and Jackson Miller, they both disappeared within a half mile to a mile of the Golden Gate Bridge. Golden Gate Bridge is the most common place people commit suicide in the United States. Go and jump off that bridge. There's no proof that either of those young men did that, but that's something that you have to look at, something you have to consider. Maybe another example would be the disappearance of Shane Fell from Louisiana. He had a car wreck right next to a levee that was next to the Mississippi River. He called for his brother to come pick him up after this car wreck. His brother gets there 20 minutes later. Shane's not there. He's never seen again. Some people may believe, I think I could believe it too, that for some reason he ended up in the Mississippi River that was only like 100 yards away. Now, why that is, hard to say. Just don't know. But what we see in Kirsten's disappearance is that there really isn't anything like that. There's the Irish Mutt, there's the bowling alley, very small, there's the YMCA, and you can see it's a residential area. There aren't really any forests, anything that you would think would be able to cover up a missing adult body. But maybe we might be surprised, and I've talked about that before in the program. Sometimes that people remains are found in areas that really are not that wooded, overgrown or anything like that. That happens. But I think just looking at this generally and having never been to this area, I think we can look at this area and say, it doesn't seem like an area where a woman or man would go missing on somebody's property without that person realizing it. And if we even want to get, zoom in here closer, where exactly was she walking? If we're to believe that she was walking east through the YMCA parking lot, well, where was she going? These are just houses here. Now, I'm not saying that she would have been seen going through this neighborhood, maybe jumping over some fences or something, but this would maybe be a little easier to understand if over in this area, it was a huge forest and it was mountains, something like that just went for miles and miles and miles. Then that would be easier to understand. But here we have a residential area in Indianapolis, and it just goes on for a long time to the east. So it's a little hard to understand where she could have been going. But we can't rule out the idea. Maybe she was walking that direction. Maybe she knows somebody over in that area. Maybe she called Uber or used her Uber app or Lyft app to get picked up. Or maybe, because like I said, there's no information I could find that says that she lived in this area at all. I found 5 different addresses for her, nowhere around this immediate area of what you're looking at on the screen. So it's just a little stumper, and I get into it in the third part, the third theme for this Unfound Now is oftentimes missing people make decisions that seem illogical to the rest of us. Why would she walk off by herself? Why would she be walking down to a bowling alley? Why would she be walking through a YMCA parking lot by herself? Why would she be walking east into this residential area when there doesn't seem to be anywhere to go? I don't know. So that is the map part of this presentation regarding the disappearance of Kirsten Brueggemann. So we'll now go back where I make my 3 points, 3 themes, you might say, for her disappearance. Okay, in continuing this discussion of Kirsten Brueggemann's disappearance, I'm going to move on to what I talked about in the beginning, and that is some points and themes that can be learned from her disappearance, and maybe this will give us more insight into disappearances as a whole. I want to start with the first point that I brought up, poor reporting in disappearances. This is something that I run across quite a bit in covering all the disappearances that we've done on Unfound. Some disappearances reporting is pretty good. Most, not really. And I want to talk about that. But just to give you an example of this, once again, this is 2.5 months into the disappearance of Kirsten. And the most complete article that I could find is the one that I'm going to read to you right now. And I think you will see what I mean. The most complete article I could find, here it is. This is from Indianapolis, WISH. Indianapolis police are seeking help to find a missing woman, Kirsten Brueggemann, 26, who was last seen walking south from Manly's Irish Mutt, a bar and grill at 7041 East 10th Street, about 12:20 a.m. Saturday. She was going toward a bowling alley that was closed. Later, a surveillance camera saw her go east past the Winter Woodworking Company, 702 North Short Ridge Road, and then south on Short Ridge toward East Washington Street. She was wearing a gray stocking cap, a black coat that goes to the waist, and blue jeans, and was carrying a white bag. Bruggeman was described as 5'2" and 115 pounds with brown hair and eyes. So brown hair and brown eyes. Anyone with information on her whereabouts was asked to call the Indianapolis Metro Police Department's Missing Persons Unit at 317-327-6160 or Crime Stoppers of Central Indiana at 317-262-8477. That's it. That is the most complete article on Kirsten's disappearance for the past 2.5 months. To me, this is an article that would be good, and I think it was written very early on in the disappearance. I did not write down the date, maybe just a few days after she disappeared. This kind of article is fine for when a disappearance just happens, like within 24 hours, 48 hours. But 2.5 months later, that I'm still pointing out this article as being the most complete one, it just shouldn't be. It just should not be. And as I have written in my notes, no quotes from friends who were there that night. And in fact, we'll talk about the friends here in a moment in the second point I want to make. No report on how she got to the pub. No report on why the friends let her leave alone. No names of the friends there. No quotes from them. As is, I can tell you, I can find many articles where friends have been quoted. Not this one. We don't know if she had been drinking. So it's just not as complete an article as you would like. Once again, this article is fine in the first few days, but it's obvious that no media site in Indianapolis has reapproached the topic of Kirsten being missing since she disappeared in the beginning of January. That's bad. That's bad. I know that probably other people have gone missing in Indianapolis since then. That's what the odds say. But I'm sure most of them have turned up alive or deceased. Kirsten is the one who is still missing. And still, no new articles, no reporter showing up, no quotes from the family, no quotes from her siblings or co-workers, nothing. It's a little pathetic, and people wonder, families wonder why their missing loved one is sometimes forgotten so quickly. This is part of the reason. This is just not good reporting. There should have been a follow-up by now, something more complete. Certainly, maybe not in January, but it's certainly in February once the disappearance becomes a month old, and certainly 2.5 months later, which is where we are right now. This is all we have. This kind of article does not give the public a lot to use a word, to chew on. It just doesn't. It would be helpful to know a lot more information. Because the reason these articles are put out is because maybe the public can't help. Well, this kind of article at 2.5 months later is not helpful. The reason being, nobody is going to remember at this point whether they were on those streets at that time, at that night, on that date, and saw a woman walking. Nobody is able to do that 2.5 months later. They're not going to remember a woman in a gray stocking cap, a black coat. By this time, this article, even though it's like 2 months old, it might as well be 10 years old. This is how quickly these things can get old, how quickly things can change. And so Kirsten needs more coverage. I'm happy that I'm doing this podcast to move that along. But more local media in the Indianapolis area needs to re-engage on Kirsten's disappearance. Go to the family's home, sit down with them, talk about what was going on in Kirsten's life, track down those people who were with her that night. Those friends, if they want to keep their names out of it, that's fine too. But we need that kind of information to get into what was going on in Kirsten's life. What was her demeanor? Why she left? Was she really going to the bowling alley? Did she know anybody in the area? This is all information that is unknown, and it shouldn't be unknown 2.5 months later. If it was 2 weeks later, I can understand. 2.5 months later is incomprehensible, and I am a reporter. Now, you should know I have experience in this area myself. Those of you who know that I worked with the Tribune Review in Pittsburgh for 1 year, 2018, helping them cover old disappearances from the Pittsburgh area, kind of in that Allegheny County, Washington County, Westmoreland County area of Pennsylvania. I can tell you, I liked, if he watches this video, I liked the guy that I worked with. I thought he was a good guy. I thought that we got along well. The problem is that the articles didn't even come close to being enough in depth, considering that these disappearances were as old as they are. All right. I was hoping for them to do something a lot more complete than was done. Now, why wasn't that done? I'm guessing it was because of a lack of time and a lack of resources. We know that newspapers these days, circulation is not going up. This is not the 1970s, and so I get that. But this type of news is very, very important. It's much more important than who won the local pie baking contest. And they just didn't give them enough coverage, in my opinion. But despite that, kind of two of the disappearances that we've covered kind of have moved forward since then, I think because of the coverage. And then I start to think, well, had we done even more in-depth coverage, now it was out of my hands. I was just like an assistant. It was not totally under my control. But then I start wondering, well, had we done even more, could we have moved even more of those disappearances from the Pittsburgh area forward? So I have experience in this area dealing with a media company that only wants to do so much. I mean, I guess doing something is better than nothing, but I still insist that more could have been done, and it wasn't. And this is not, I don't think, the reporter's fault. This was a decision, I think, that was made at a level much higher than his pay grade, much higher than my assistant pay grade. So I have experience in this area. So I think I have an idea of what is going on there in Indianapolis, what has to change, not just in Indianapolis, not just in Pittsburgh, but everywhere. You just have to, you can't just report on these disappearances once and forget them if they remain unsolved. This is the reason that people forget about these things. All right. But having said that, the family itself, Kirsten's family, needs to be more engaged as well. I've gone to social media. Not a lot going on there. Not a lot going on. So it's not just a reporter issue. It's not just a media issue. I think the family needs to do more. And if they're watching this, if the police are telling you that, you just need to let them do their work and everything, don't listen to them. I'm telling you, don't listen to them. That's all I can say right here on the record. But I tell my guests this too, because police are very good at saying, you don't want to say anything, you don't want to do this, it's going to ruin our investigation. Well, then 20 years later, the police are still saying the same thing, and the disappearance is still unsolved. I have people who I've talked to, disappearances 20 years, 30 years old, where the police are still saying, don't say anything. It's crazy. So there's that. Reporting on disappearances needs to change, and it begins by getting more in-depth months down the road, 2 months down the road, if a disappearance is still unsolved. Let's move on to this. Unhelpful friends. Now, you should know, I don't know if the friends are necessarily being unhelpful or not. I don't know who was there with Kirsten that night. What I know is I've gone to Web Sleuths, I've gone to Facebook, I've gone to other social media sites, and I can't find anybody who is admitting to being with Kirsten there at the Irish Mutt that night. That's what I know. Nobody out there saying, Kirsten, we hope you're well. Won't you come home? We're worried about you. I couldn't find anything. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. All I'm saying is it's not overt. And I'm used to looking for stuff on the internet. That's what I do, along with my assistants. So why is that? Now, you should know this is not unusual when friends sometimes don't say a lot. I'm going to just talk about some disappearances and kind of in two different categories. Let's talk about when friends are suspects. Some of those disappearances that we've covered on Unfound where friends are suspects to this day, even though some of these disappearances are very, very old. Lola Catherine Fry, Dave Medott, Omar Shearer, and Kent Monroe, who went scuba diving. Their friend Jeff Wandich came back. These three did not. Lucinda Hewells, a disappearance right here in the Tampa area from the 1980s. Sean Koski from Oregon. Joe Bain, and many, many more, where friends are supposed to be, close with a missing person, but then these friends end up being suspects. Now, what about some disappearances where the friends aren't necessarily suspects, but there's stories, they just maybe, you get the idea that they're not just being as forthcoming as you'd think. Some of those. Keith Fetter, who was with some people he knew well, and allegedly he jumped out of a car and ran off into the woods, never to come back. Tiffany Johnson. Now, you should know that her ex-boyfriend was convicted for kidnapping her, but her remains have not been found. This just happened within the last couple years. But there were other people there that day, and my impression is if they had been more aware of what was going on, I think probably this disappearance might have even never happened. David Kesey, who went to a party and then allegedly left, and all his friends are like, we just don't know what happened. Jesse Ross, a very well-known disappearance from the Chicago area from the early 2000s. He was there for a convention with other college students. His friends are there, people he knows well, and he just up and left. And he is still missing all these years later. Another, probably the best example of friends being suspects, but then it didn't turn out to be that way, was Morgan Harrington. This is not a disappearance we covered on Unfound. In fact, her disappearance and murder was solved before Unfound ever got started. If you will remember, she went to a Metallica concert on a college campus, and I'm not going to name the college. I do not want to hurt their reputation. But she went there with friends, but somehow, before the concert started, she ended up on the outside of the concert, and they were on the inside. Well, the way it is these days, once you leave a concert, you can't get back in. They don't want people going in, going out, going in. And so she couldn't get back in, and then she disappeared. And there were many people at the time, and you can go on Web Sleuths and other places way back at the time, because nothing on the internet ever disappears. Many people were suspicious of her friends. Are they telling the truth? Are you sure that they didn't do something to her? Well, in the end, they did not do anything to her. They were innocent bystanders. In fact, bystanders. And what happened was Morgan got abducted. Maybe she willingly got into the car with this guy. But he was cruising that campus looking for a woman to rape, found Morgan. He ended up raping her and killing her. And the way they caught him was through DNA. And it turns out that he had raped and I think murdered another woman before and had just not been caught yet. And so it was just bad luck, very, very horrible luck for Morgan. But he was cruising that area, I'm sure looking for a woman to harm. So friends thought as being kind of suspicious. Their actions were suspicious regarding Morgan, and that's not what happened. They had nothing to do with this. It was just bad, unfortunate circumstances. So friends sometimes can be seen as suspects, and looking back at Morgan's in particular, I really don't remember how their friends reacted to being thought of as suspects. I think a lot of people thought that these friends were not as helpful as they could be. And I think that's the way I'm feeling about Kirsten's friends right now. I don't know their names. Even if I knew their names, I would not air them on this video. But I think that's part of it. You would think that when missing people are with friends and then that person goes off, that the friends would be out there all the time. And that does happen sometimes. But a lot of these people don't want the attention. Why? Because there are a lot of kooks out there. There are certainly a lot of kooks in the missing persons community. I know they message me. They email me. They sometimes post things in our discussion group on Facebook, on the Facebook page and everything else. And I can see why people in the general public would want to avoid those types of people. I can't avoid them because I'm in here doing this, and I enjoy trying to help solve these missing persons cases. But people who are, just happened upon this, their friend goes missing, and then suddenly they're being thrust into the spotlight. Most people are not into that. In fact, if they were into that, we might even be more suspicious of them. So this is one of the main reasons that even if a missing person is around friends, and these friends even aren't thought of as suspects, and then the friend goes missing, those friends still kind of are shy. They avoid the media. And I can think of several disappearances that we've covered on Unfound, even more than the ones I've named, where the friends just, maybe they might have said something early on in the disappearance, but years later, they don't want to touch it. They've moved on. And that is something that unfortunately families find out, that friends do move on. That the girlfriend of the missing guy, they move on. They have their own lives to lead. Now, certainly in Kirsten's disappearance, I still stand by the idea that I would like to hear more about her demeanor, what she was thinking, what the discussions were that night. What did people think when she decided she wanted to leave? Where did they think she was going to walk to? That's all important information. And I would hope that, unfortunately, if this disappearance does become a year old or 2 years old or 5 years old, and somewhere down the road, I do cover Kirsten's disappearance for an official episode of Unfound, those are surely going to be topics that I would hope to ask whoever I was talking to. Well, what were the friends thinking that night? What were you thinking? Why did they allow her to leave on her own? These are big, big, important questions in any disappearance. And it's not just if it's a woman. Men too. So this is, I think, Unhelpful Friends is, I wouldn't necessarily say it's common, but it's probably more common than you think for those of you in the public. I know all of us think, well, if a friend of mine went missing, I'd be out there doing everything. Maybe not. Maybe the first time you would get some troll on Facebook or something, that might just cause you to say the heck with this. Because they are common. Just a lot of horrible people out there like that. So I guess what I'm saying is don't judge these people too harshly until you walk a mile in their shoes. Because these people have their own lives to lead. I don't think, to my knowledge, none of her friends are being evasive or anything like that. But once again, friends often are not as helpful as you would think. Moving on, number 3, missing people do unexplainable, illogical things. The toughest part, and I say this to my listeners, and I conduct a think tank on Sunday evenings. It's very private with some listeners. We talk about this a lot. Trying to apply, here we are, sober people thinking logically, and trying to apply it to a situation that may, to our standards, not be logical. It's very difficult. This pops up a lot in disappearances involving drugs, where it's an addict who's gone missing. We don't know if the person shot up right before he or she went missing. We don't know if we can trust their friends. Getting back to point number 2, if these friends are also addicts, because I've talked to a lot of addicts over the course of this program, or former addicts, and they'll talk about how when they were high, they just lost track of the days. And so it's hard to apply our standards to a situation when we don't know all of the information. And with Kirsten's, how do we explain a young woman who walks off into the night, 12:20 a.m., by herself, in the cold, and at least to the information, the research I did, she doesn't live in the area. Was she walking to a bus stop? We don't know. What is the logic behind that? Why did she leave by herself? Why didn't she stay with her friends? Because those seem like logical choices, but that's not what Kirsten did. So it's difficult. And I have some examples of this from disappearances that Unfound has covered. I've already mentioned Jesse Ross, who was there, good young kid, conscientious, seemed like he had a great radio career ahead of him. He goes with his friends, classmates to Chicago for this convention, and on the last night of the convention, at 1:30 in the morning, he just walks out of this conference room, never to come back. Somewhat similar to Kirsten's. It kind of does sound similar. To this day, nobody knows where he went. Now, how do we apply any logic to that? It very well may be that he was walking back to his hotel and got abducted, got kidnapped. Possible, but that would be very, very rare. So, but we're trying to think of it logically. We don't know what was in Jesse's head. We covered the disappearance of Rodney Kaiser from Virginia. He said he was going to see his brother the whole way, or somebody said he was going to see his brother the whole way across the state on the east side of Virginia. Instead, his truck was found right down the street in another piece of property they owned like a mile or two away. How do we apply any logic to that? Now, there are suspicions that there was foul play involved, but that's a disappearance that's still unsolved, and it's a fairly old disappearance. How do we apply any logic to that? A disappearance that we covered that is now solved is Crystal Morrisons from North Carolina. She was at work. She wasn't feeling well. She called a guy who was taking care of her son to come pick her up. the guy showed up with her son. She wasn't at her work. She went missing. And the only other evidence they had was there was a Shell station about a half-mile, quarter-mile down the road that the video camera caught her on camera in that store after she called to be picked up. Now, why would she do that? Why would she say that she was sick, call to get picked up, and then walk down the street to someplace else? Illogical. Now, you should know that disappearance is solved. Her remains were found not far from that Shell station on private property. When some surveyors went in there, they're going to be widening the road or something, and her remains were found. And it has been determined that she died of natural causes. Now, you should know that it was 100 degrees that day. It very well could be that Crystal was sick. She was a former addict. She was underweight. It's not believed that she was doing drugs or anything, but she succumbed to the elements. She might have just got delirious, heat stroke, something like that, dehydrated, and wandered off into those woods and died. Totally illogical why she would call and then walk away from her work if she was sick. But that's what she did. And then we have Nico Lisi, a disappearance where a young man from New York decided to jump in his truck and ride with this. He and his friend drove from New York to Tennessee, and that's where he went missing. Still, not totally logical. The way I remember it, he had never been to Tennessee before, but he ends up on this street down there, and then his truck is found later, all parted out. Trying to apply logic to that, it's difficult. So getting back to Kirsten's and looking at the decisions she made that night, in her mind, they might be totally logical. In her mind. The problem is we don't know what was in her mind. And so the toughest part about disappearances is trying to apply logic to something that it very well may be in our minds, illogical. So, once again, Kirsten didn't have a home in the area. Was she going to the bus stop? Did she know somebody in that area? Was she walking to that person's house? If so, why hasn't that person come forward? When she found out that the bowling alley was closed, why didn't she go back to the pub? It's very, very confusing. Why was she walking into the parking lot of this YMCA? Why didn't she stay on the street? In her mind, maybe it was a perfectly logical reason. To us, we just don't know. It just doesn't seem very rational to us. Now, as for theories, in my opinion, everything on the table, at least the public information, according to the public information, should be on the table right now. An abduction, was she walking to a bus stop or somewhere, and somebody pulled up and attacked her, drugged her into the car? That certainly is a possibility. Was she walking somewhere and get injured that led to her death in a wooded area? Did she walk off and commit suicide? That has to be an option. Did she decide to run out of her life? Now, I know what some of you may say, well, that doesn't happen often. What doesn't? But I can tell you, just recently on the program, I had Heather Grotman on. She writes at the lostandfoundblogs.com website. And her most recent two entries on her blog are about people who disappeared in one area and ended up being found states away. There was a guy in Texas who went missing on Super Bowl Sunday. I forget what year. He was found. He was hit by a car. What was it? In the state of Washington. So he's in Texas. He's hit by a car in the state of Washington or Oregon 48 hours later. In addition, there's a woman who went with her husband to New York City. He had some business to take care of. He came back to the hotel room. She wasn't there. It was later determined that she died in the woods in North Carolina. How do these things happen? We're just not sure. I don't think anybody knows how these kinds of things can happen, how people got from one place to another place. Did they fly? Did they take the bus? Did they rent a car? Don't know. So these things happen, although they are rare. And once again, if you want to check out those two cases, you can go to the lostandfoundblogs.com website, run by my good friend, frequent guest, 3-time guest on Unfound, Heather Grotman. So Kirsten might have said, you know what, I'm done with this life. I'm going to change my name. I'm going to go somewhere and live a new life. And then did she arrange to be picked up somewhere? And something happened. Did she secretly tell someone to pick her up down the street? And maybe this was kind of a late night rendezvous, a romantic rendezvous, and something happened. That happens too. Did she get lured somewhere? As in the disappearance of Tyler North, the disappearance that we covered on Unfound, where he vanished in a park, and it is now known that his ex-wife and her boyfriend lured him there. There are no facts to undermine any of those. Once again, what I know publicly, I've not talked to her family. I don't know any more than what any of you do. But there are no facts to support or undermine any of these theories, so they all must remain on the table. But we could narrow those choices down if we had more information. Once again, going back to the phone information. If the friends did come forward and start talking about what was going on with Kirsten, what was the situation that night? If we had some of that information, then all of those choices, I think, could be narrowed down to maybe 4. I think what I go through, maybe 6 or 7. We might be able to narrow them down to 4 and then reassess where we stand in our analysis of Kirsten's disappearance. So in my opinion, at this point, anything is possible. And I don't believe in UFOs. So anything other than UFOs beaming her up, I think is possible at this time from what I know. Now, one more thing before I conclude this video. I see that Kirsten's family is trying to raise money for a private investigator to get involved and try to get to the bottom of what happened to Kirsten. I want to go on the record and saying I think that's a mistake. Private investigators, I don't want to get too deeply into this. People who have listened or watched Unfound for a long time know my attitude. It's probably just going to be a big waste of money. Now, I know families are like, we got to just do anything. We're going to pay anybody. We're going to listen to psychics and everything else. And if they want to spend their own money to do that, they can do that. There's no law in the United States that can stop them from doing that. But when you start asking for money from other people, you must be honest with them and saying, we're going to do this, we're going to get this private investigator, but the odds are he's probably not going to make any headway. How do I know that? Because that's what happens in 99.99% of the disappearances that where private investigators are involved. We also have to remember that most private investigators do not know anything about missing persons cases. They're great at maybe doing other things, but missing persons cases, not so much. That is a fact of 4.5 years of covering over 200 disappearances. So I have a problem when people ask for donations to pay for a private investigator. Even, in fact, in my opinion, it's much too early for that, to get a private investigator involved. I think that instead, the family should be more open. They should be talking more about Kirsten. Those friends, the family should get the friends to be talking about Kirsten, everything that was going on at that night, what was going on in Kirsten's life, and just because I think what goes on is families think, well, I'm going to pay this private investigator and all this information is going to come out. They're going to find out all of this stuff. That the police don't want to do it. The police have moved on. And it's probably the case, probably for the most part, that the police have moved on. But that doesn't mean a private investigator is going to be able to do much more. And in fact, I would say that a lot of private investigators are con artists. They just take the money and don't do anything. That is common. So for Kirsten's family, if you don't know this, I'm telling you, I don't know, and I'm not naming this investigative agency. I don't know this person. I've never heard of this person, having done missing persons cases for 4.5 years. I've covered a couple disappearances in the state of Indiana. I've never heard of this person. And just because this person has law enforcement experience and has all these assistants who with military experience and everything else, that doesn't mean anything. Unless these people have been working missing persons cases for like 20 or 30 years and had a lot of success finding missing children or adults, whether alive or deceased, if that's the situation, then maybe it's worth it. Otherwise, I would not spend a dime, and I would just do the work on your own. I think. That's my honest opinion, and I tell my guests the exact same thing. And my guests have horror stories talking about dealing with private investigators. So for Kirsten's family, if you're watching this, this is just information. You're going to make your own decision. I'm going to support whatever you want to do anyway, but you need the facts, and those are the facts. So that is the disappearance of Kirsten Brueggemann, and I hope I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. I tried to find a pronunciation of it, but I couldn't find no video of anyone pronouncing her last name, so I gave it my best shot. If I mispronounced it, I apologize. But that is my analysis. That is the Unfound Now for Kirsten Brueggemann, who disappeared on January 2nd from Indianapolis, Indiana, in the year 2021. Thank you for watching.